In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. Excuse me. Sorry. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. Whatever the virtues of the many fields of knowledge, all are steps in the path of omniscience. May these arise in the clear mirror of intellect. O my true Shri, please accomplish this. Hey, good evening. Welcome back to our ongoing exploration of realizing the view of the middle way, really, and the Buddhist tradition and all of its many varieties. Tonight we continue dipping a toe in the vast ocean of texts of the Yogacara tradition. And vast indeed they are. Just looking at this text, which admittedly was a little difficult to get through. And then the books, this comes from this 3-volume set by Karl Brunholzl. These are 2 of them here, altogether about 1,700 pages or something, some insane thing. But just realizing how amazing this text, what Karl Brunholzl has done is, and sort of feeling remorse that we didn't use his sources more to go through the Yogacara tradition, but we did to some extent. We did that Maitreya thing that he did. But I thought I wanted to start by looking through what he has in this presentation of this one text by a Sangha. And we didn't really have a good overview of the writings of a Sangha. So just off the top of my head, then I'll pass it over to Chris if he has any more detail on it, but just off the top of my head, the Sangha is credited with 4, in my mind, actually with 3 main texts. One is called the Higher Abhidharma, or known as the Higher Abhidharma, the Mahayana Abhidharma Samgraha. We all know the word Mahayana. It's like Mahayana, but pronounced correctly. And then there's Abhidharma, and then Samgraha is the compilation. And it's the companion piece to his brother Vasubandhu's Abhidharma, Kosha Treasury of Abhidharma. So it presents the Mahayana version, or Yogacara version, really, of the Abhidharma. And then secondly is this text on the Mahayana Samgraha, the compendium of the Mahayana, which is not a long text, but is quite an amazing compilation of the view of the Mahayana. And in Karl's translation, it takes approximately, a little bit under 100 pages. And then thirdly, he's credited with putting together a massive compendium called the Yogacara Bhumi. Yogacara as in Yogacara, and Bhumi, which means ground, is used to refer to the progress of a bodhisattva towards enlightenment, but it's also used more generally as the levels or the stages that one goes through Yogacara. And it's like thousands of pages, consisting of 17 different texts and 5 parts, and just massive compilation. And in that he compiles all the presentations of the Hinayana and the Mahayana to date of the Alabama. But I think it's largely unavailable. What's in that text? There's tiny snippets of it in translation, which is sort of frustrating. But one of the most famous parts is the Shravakabhumi that describes the whole system of meditation. There is another section called the Bodhisattva Bhumi, which is in translation. It's quite an interesting text. But it's like we could spend whole courses just going through one or two of these texts by Sangha. Chris, do you have anything to add to the writings of a Sangha, the works of a Sangha?
One just general comment I would make is reading this, and Derek's read a lot more of all of this stuff than I have. But what was apparent to me at first brush was a real difference in style and tone from the writings of Maitreya, which Asanga, also brought with him, right? So that may give us some clue into whether they're by the same author. There's some speculation that Asanga is, writing under a pen name for these Maitreya texts. But we see a very different sort of presentation with Asanga. And I think with this chapter immediately opens with appealing to the authority of sutra. Uh, he's he starts right away by referencing a number of sutras to give credibility to the arguments that he's going to make, and that wasn't something that I think we saw this in the same sense with Maitreya. Maitreya spoke much more authoritatively on his own terms. So that's just something I noticed, and sort of I don't know in terms of like the detective work of, well, who actually wrote these Maitreya texts. Sort of interesting.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah, major point there that the style is just so different. Maitreya is writing in independent texts, not relying on other scriptures primarily, although his Mahayana Sutra Alamkara, the ornament to the Mahayana Sutras, is just a compilation of excerpts from various Mahayana Sutras, but the other ones are independent expositions, and this is very much like a commentary on it. Has a very hugely different style. Maitreya as being like poetic verse, and this being very dense, analytical text.
But
It's not.
also sort of interwoven, he has these sections that are in verse. Sometimes describing what he's just written, and sometimes sort of commenting and providing additional interpretation for the prose sections.
Yeah, which is a common thing throughout the different writings of the Buddhist tradition, alternating between prose and verse. It's a very helpful way of sort of perking up the situation, particularly in a dense text. I think many of his verse sections are excerpts from other sutras, but still very helpful. So I wanted to share my screen and show you this text by Carl, and so you get a sense of, and then we'll go through the first few pages of this, the table of contents of the text, so you see what we're looking at the first chapter of before we dive in. So I got a note from my computer saying the file is too large. It's like 31,000 megabytes or something. So if you can't see anything on the screen at any point, let me know. And I don't know what I'll try, but I'll shift to something else. So here's Carl's introduction. Unfortunately, this does not have the pagination. And Carl is famous for his huge 300 to 500 page introductions. But here he's very modest. His introduction is 150 pages. Someday somebody's gonna like pull out his introductions and publish them as independent works because they're so amazing. I had connected with the head of Wisdom Publications recently and suggested that. He was like, yeah. Anyway, so he goes through the text and its commentaries. He talks about the text, gives an overview in Indian and Tibetan commentaries and some others, primarily Chinese. And then he says, talks about the Abhidharma Sutra, Abhidharma Mahayana Sutra. So, have people read this sutra, the Mahayana Abhidharma Sutra? That was a trick question. This sutra does not exist in written form that anybody knows about, which is such an amazing, sad fact, because it's such a huge source of reference for so many Mahayana texts. The Mahayana Abhidharma Sutra. I've seen other authors say that it might not be actually in a text, but just like a term used to refer to Abhidharma, like stanzas that authors excerpt from other texts and call euphemistically the Abhidharma Sutra. But Carl treats it completely as an actual text, as does Sangha. And so all we have is, and Carl does an amazing job of looking at where it's talked about in other texts and how many references and so forth are made to it. It goes through Alaya consciousness, afflicted mind, and in detail, and then he dives into the translation. So here's the Compendium of Mahayana Samgraha. It has its own little introduction. We did the first chapter, then the characteristics, penetrating further into those characteristics, causes and results of the penetration. So it's not like the penetration into the characteristics is not just like an academic thing, but it's part of the path, basically. So what are the causes of being able to penetrate in, and then the divisions of how do we cultivate the causes? And then the three trainings: superior discipline, mind, and prajna. And this is a hugely common scheme in the Buddhist tradition, and he picks up on that and uses that scheme. Then what is the result of the training? And I guess as a relinquishment of defilements, and then the positive side is the wisdom. Carl then translates Vasubandhu's commentary, and he uses what now has become a sort of common feature among scholars of like not giving you the author's name on texts in a very frustrating way. He describes the authors in his introduction, but like you go to that page and there's the text, the commentary starts without an author anyway. That's by Sangha's brother, Vasubandhu. Then he has another commentary, which I can't remember who it's by, a little one on the first chapter. And then an amazing array of appendixes. A reference to this treatise called the Alaya treatise, called the Vinishchaya Samgraha, which is Samgrahani, which I believe is part of the Yogacara Bhumi corpus, as they call it. It talks about something in Mochana Sutra, connection between 8 consciousnesses and the 4 conditions. And we saw the 4 conditions referenced in our reading today, just to make sure we're all up on the 4 conditions because it's helpful. The 4 conditions are the contributing situations that bring about an event, a cognitive event, and they are the dominant condition, which is the sense space, the object condition, which is the object of that sense space, and then there's the immediately preceding condition, which is the cognition, the type of consciousness that existed the moment before, because consciousness is a series of moments that arise based on the prior moment, as opposed to coming out of nowhere. And then the fourth one is the causal condition, which is like, what happens to bring all that stuff together? Like, there's a loud noise, and it grabs your attention. So that would be the causal condition of the auditory conscious cognition of the sound. Reference to this text called the Qianwei Shi Lun, a Chinese, famous Chinese text that's a commentary on the text by Vasubandhu, which we'll come to. That's on the three natures, the issue of mind only. And then some of the major topics that come up in the text, the 10 distractions, the 4 attentions, investigations, overview of the past, the 3 natures, and the resultant side, the wisdoms, Mahamudra of meditation, the differences between mind only. Oh, I clicked on it and here I am. Sorry. Between mind only and Yogacara. And we're just about ready to dive in. So, the notion of gocha, disposition, which is such an odd term because it's different than Buddha nature. Tathagata Garba versus gocha, and causes and results. Anyway, I wanted to go to the beginning of our text, which we didn't include, and just see how a song opens this text. Let's see how it opens it on page 151. There we go. Page numbers, right?
I think it's going to be like 209 in the PDF, Derek.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That saves a lot of time. I went from 2. Here we go. Okay, that's not the introduction. Here's the introduction. Sorry about this. I should have set this up. As Chris says, right from the bat, he's quoting Sutra in order to state the Mahayana's character of greatness, Bodhisattva, blah, 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 said the following in the presence of the Bhagavan. With regard to the Mahayana, the teachings of the Buddha Bhagavans are distinguished through 10 kinds of distinctive features. The teachings of the Bhagavan are distinguished through the distinctive feature that consists of the foundation of what is to be known. This formulaic phrase gets repeated, the characteristics, the penetrating. So this is just basically the list of the chapter titles that we went through already. The instructions of the words of the sutras of the Buddha Bhagavans express the Mahayana is indeed the speech of the Buddha. How do they express it? Through the instructions in that fashion, the 10 topics that are not taught in the Shravakayana are taught in the Mahayana as follows. The Alaya consciousness is taught as the foundation of what is to be known. The 3 natures are taught as the characteristics of what is to be known. Mind only. Carl's using this phrase, mere cognizance, as a way of like shifting us out of the sort of habitual way that many of us, old timers maybe new timers as well, have grown accustomed to, like mind only meaning a certain thing, and instead using mere cognizance as I try to give a different slant on that term, being a more subtle understanding. Penetrating the characteristics, the six paramitas are taught as the cause and results of penetrating. The 10 bhumis are taught as the divisions of cultivating. The bodhisattva vows are taught as the superior discipline within the division of cultivating. And when they talk about the bodhisattva vows in the context of the 10 bhumis, they're generally talking about the stage of the 8th level bodhisattva, where there's a quality of like vowing that when I become a Buddha, I will do X, Y, and Z, blah, blah, blah. The samadhis that are taught as the superior mind within this division of cultivation, and he lists two of them. There's thousands of samadhis in the Mahayana Sutras, and there's various schemes of them, but there's a set of 4 that are most commonly referred to in the Mahayana tradition, and these are 2 of them: the heroic stride and the sky treasure. Another one is like the lion's gaze, and I can't remember the 4th, but interesting names. It's like, what are these samadhis? Non-conceptual wisdom is taught as the superior prajna. So non-conceptual wisdom we saw come up last week in the Dharma Dharmatavabhanga, and the non-abiding nirvana is taught as the relinquishment that is the result of the training. Chris, what's the significance of the term non-abiding nirvana?
You stumped me.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to do that. This is a scheme that's not that commonly referred to. So in the the Shravaka tradition, they have 2 types of nirvana. There's nirvana with outflows and nirvana with outflows. And the outflows, in Sanskrit, ashravas, refers to, it's used in some cases as the literal outflows of things from the body, like excrement and sweat and other types of things that are exuded from bodies. And it comes to mean the defilements that are exuded by the accumulation of negative propensities of beings. And so an arhat has achieved the elimination of, I'm sorry, so an arhat, while alive, is still subject to the outflows of the karmic situation of having a body, being in a body, and all that entails in terms of sickness and physical outflows and needing to eat and things like that. And so they had this idea that they don't really achieve complete nirvana, where you're not bothered by the hassles of the physical body until you relinquish the physical body, and then you achieve nirvana without outflows. And so it has this sense of like it abides in one place or another. Like, I don't know, the term non-abiding doesn't totally fit the situation of the outflows, but the idea is it's based on a context and a situation. So when there's no skandhas in the after-death state of an arhat, then one achieves complete nirvana in the sense of the blowing out of a candle, where there's a last moment of the life force of an arhat, and then that does not give rise to the next moment of an arhat, because the energy or the causes and conditions that lead to the re-arising of the continuum of an individual in each moment have been exhausted. And then one achieves that without outflows. And the idea of non-abiding nirvana is that the Mahayana came along and said, it doesn't matter whether you're in a body or not. Nirvana is completely unconditional and transcendent. And outflows are just illusory, or like illusion, not illusory, but like illusions. So what is the significance of this non-abiding nirvana? That's taught as the relinquishment that is the result of the training. So there's two aspects to Buddha. There's the relinquishment of defilements, and there's the blossoming of Buddha qualities in the form of the three kayas of a Buddha, the wisdom that's a result of this training. And these are the superior topics taught by the Buddha. How do the teachings of the Tathagata that are distinguished through these demonstrate the mind or represent the word? How can it be denied that the Shravaka is included? For it appears that these 10 topics are not taught in the Shravakayana, but they appear in the Mahayana. These 10 are what makes one accomplish great awakening, and therefore they're fully justified for accord with and without contradiction to the attainment of omniscient wisdom. He gives that in verse, explains the order, and then we have our chapter. So I wanted to look at, I think it's 3, maybe 4 sections of this without getting lost in the whole thing, unrealistically trying to go through the whole thing. So let's talk through the very first part of this. So first of all, the very beginning is clear about it, that the Alaya consciousness is the foundation of what is to be known. Where did the Buddha talk about that? In Abhidharma Sutra, that Dhatu, a beginningless time, is the foundation of all phenomena. Due to its existence, all forms of existence and also nirvana are obtained. So here we have another interesting use of the term existence that's similar to the way it was used in the text by Maitreya of distinguishing between middle and extremes, where he says like confusion exists and within that emptiness exists. And you're like, what is this existence stuff? I thought like Nagarjuna took care of existence and we were beyond that duality. But he and Maitreya are back in using this term, existence. And one might debate the utility and skillfulness of that. But so this phrase, Dhatu, a beginningless time, as a sort of synonym of Alaya Vijnana. Also, the consciousness that contains all the seeds of all phenomena is the Alaya. Therefore, it is the Alaya consciousness. So the consciousness that contains the seeds of all phenomena is the Alaya, and therefore it is the Alaya consciousness. So here, in terms of textual analysis, we have this text seems to be a rather early text in the development of the Yogacara tradition. I don't think there was any mention in this chapter of Buddha nature. Maybe there was like one section where there was a little bit of talk of the Buddha nature or Buddha quality, but very far from the equivalence of Alaya Vijnana with Buddha nature, and very far from a sort of predominance of the concept of Buddha nature the way it is in later texts in this tradition. Why is it called Alaya consciousness? It is that because all afflicted phenomena that involve arising adhere to it as being its result. So, all afflicted phenomena that involve arising, that come about, adhere to it, the Alaya Vijnana, as being its results, or adheres to them as being their cause. So the grammar is a little fuzzy, but basically we have this idea that the Alaya consciousness, well, we'll see this fleshed out, but we have these 3 aspects of Alaya Vijnana, which are the nature of Alaya Vijnana as containing seeds, and it being the receptacle of the cause of those seeds, thereby, and also the source for the maturing of those seeds in the future, as the consciousnesses and as the display of what we consider to be samsara. Whereas the Alaya consciousness becomes sentient beings adhere to it as being their self. So this is what we mistake to be me. It's called the appropriating consciousness. And he quotes the Samdhinirmochana, the profound and subtle appropriating consciousness with all its seeds flows like the stream of a river, this analogy of a river that really is just made up of a lot of droplets of water that happen to come together in a certain place and pass and flow in a certain time together. But really, there is no such thing as the river. And it's just a compilation of this. I don't reveal it to childish beings who are going to misunderstand the Alaya Vijnana and think that we're talking about something substantially real, as different from the emptiness of the Madhyamaka, so that they may not imagine it as being like a self. Chris, do you want to jump in and take a couple of paragraphs?
Surely. Yeah. Are we, you just want to keep screen sharing and we'll just gonna, you can scroll as I, okay, great. This is gonna be a little tricky because I have my like printout with my notes on it. So I'll be looking at that. Okay. So this next paragraph, we start seeing certain qualities of the Alaya Vijnana. Um, he defines it as the appropriating consciousness. Do you want to turn your screen back on so people can read? Is that helpful for people? Do people want the screen share or no? Or thumbs up or down?
Yeah. No, I'm
No?
going to
Okay,
do it
sounds
in
like
the
no.
source book, though, so that you have the actual page that we're all looking at.
Yeah. Okay, source book page 152. I'll just start reading. Derek can catch up. Why is it called the appropriating consciousness? Because it is the cause of all physical sense faculties, and because it serves as the foundation for appropriating one's entire existence. Thus, for as long as one is alive, it seizes all five physical sense faculties so that they do not perish, and taking hold of its remanifestation at the time of connecting with being reborn, seizes one's new individual existence. Hence, it is called the appropriating consciousness. It is also called mind. Just as the Bhagavan, the Buddha, spoke of mind, mentation, and consciousness. And these three terms, mind, mentation, and consciousness, are sort of really important through this text. And in particular, mind is is thought of sort of exclusively as the Alaya Vijnana. Mentation as the seventh consciousness, the egoic consciousness, and and then this term consciousness refers to the sense consciousnesses. So as we go through it and he's using those terms, those are what they're pointing at. And then we
So, and
yeah,
so those would
Derek.
be like 8, 7, and
And then one through
6
six.
through 1.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah. Thanks for that. So then we immediately move into a discussion of the seventh consciousness, which he's referring to as mentation. Among these three, mentation has two aspects. It serves as a support through functioning as the immediate condition, any moment of consciousness that has just ceased, which is called mentation, is the support for the arising of the immediately following moment of consciousness. Or sorry, so I guess this aspect of mentation, this is a little confusing. This aspect of mentation, that's still describing the Alaya Vijnana. But the second aspect of mentation is the afflicted mind, which is always associated with the four afflictions that are the views about a real personality, self-conceit, attachment to a self, and ignorance. This is the support for consciousness being afflicted. Thus, consciousness is produced by virtue of the first aspect of mentation as its support. So the first aspect of mentation being the eighth consciousness, the Alaya Vijnana. This second aspect of mentation takes that as its support and makes it afflicted, since it
Can you,
cognizes. Mhm.
um, did you finish the paragraph?
I will last sentence, since it is both immediate and self-centered, mentation has two aspects.
That's all the seventh.
Yeah, so that's the seventh, the two aspects of the seventh. So the seventh has this wonderful quality of having two aspects, one of which is
Mhm.
afflicted, and the other is like the attention that
I
is
see.
not necessarily afflicted. And when I read this, I immediately remembered the way Tronger Rinpoche talks about these two aspects of the seventh consciousness, and this first aspect, he calls it the immediate mind. And I sort of had this flash that, because I struggled with that term, I was like, why is he calling? And I had this flash that maybe what he's doing is it's the immediate mind as opposed to the immediately preceding mind. Immediately preceding moment of consciousness is the cause of, is, one of the four causes along with the dominant condition and so forth. And so then this aspect of the seventh consciousness as attention is immediate, but not immediately preceding. It's immediate. I don't know. Anyway,
Isn't it? I'm sorry, I'm just wondering at the beginning or in that paragraph, it does seem like it's saying it serves as functioning as the immediate condition when one moment of consciousness is seized and all of that stuff. So isn't that the immediately preceding business?
it seems to be both. Is the support for the arising of the immediately following moment of consciousness. Admittedly, it's vague, right? This second part is clear, afflicted mind, right? And the four views, which we'll get into. Among these
It
three,
also, and I think where I was getting mixed up is it seems a bit odd that the Alaya Vijnana is sort of the source. It's sort of where all the stuff is, and then it gets appropriated in these various ways into the remaining seventh consciousnesses. So to refer in this way to the seventh consciousness as being the basis or the cause for following subsequent moments of consciousness, that feels a little odd to me.
The only reason and I don't know this for sure, obviously, I'm no expert in this, but from other readings as well, I think that the way they describe it is kind of like the seventh is, it's kind of like what Derek said with attention. It sort of knows the last moment has ended and it's sort of ready to produce a new moment. But the material for that new moment, I think, comes from the Alaya Vijnana, as you were just saying. But I think the stimulus for it comes from the seventh consciousness. It's kind of like the seventh stirs up the pot.
Sure, sure. Thanks for that. That makes a lot of sense.
but also the seventh is simultaneous with all other consciousnesses. Right? The seventh doesn't disappear. It actually is present in all moments of consciousness up until the path of seeing. And then the seventh disappears when you experience selflessness, when you understand selflessness. And then the Alaya disappears at the 10th Bhumi, or the transition to the 11th. Anyway, so it has these two aspects, and admittedly it's a little bit confusing, but let's continue on. Thank you, Chris.
And this also brings back up the what's called the doctrine of momentariness, the sense that the mind is a series of durationless instances that are constantly being fading away and re-arising. So as we've been discussing, the seventh consciousness is an important player in keeping the momentum of that going. So moving on to the next paragraph, we see some arguments for the explanatory role of the seventh consciousness. So there are 6 of these, which are some are more clear than others. So we'll just go through them quickly. One, if it did not exist, there would be the flaw of unique ignorance. So unique ignorance is sort of one of these code terms, and is said to be the deep-seated, subtle misconception of reality and the root cause of suffering. And if we can skip ahead a little bit to the last sentence on page 153, the verse section. If you just go down a little more. Yeah, okay. So what always serves as this is sort of a explanation of what the unique ignorance is, this last stanza of verse. What always serves as an obstruction to the mind that engages in actual reality, and what it occurs at all times is asserted as unique ignorance. So that's what unique ignorance is. Um, and it's sort of, like that's the problem right there. That's this is the problem. Um,
And this section here, while we're here, gives
mhm.
further detail on this unique ignorance. You read the end of it.
Yeah, yeah. The
Okay.
uh, and then so okay, so number two.
Question.
Yeah, Debbie.
Could you comment a little bit about his use of the word flaws, like you commented on the unique ignorance? The use of the word flaws here.
What he's saying is, so if the seventh consciousness didn't exist, there would be the flaw of unique ignorance not existing either. I think what he's saying is that we know unique ignorance exists, at least relatively, right? Uh, and if and it seems to exist in the seventh consciousness. If we got rid of the seventh consciousness, we would get rid of this main issue, um, that causes so much trouble in our lives. That's where it's sort of positioned in the scheme. So if you get rid of that positioning, you get rid of that problem too.
But I think you're talking in terms of the path quality. But I think he's coming at it from reasoning, like how do you logically support this idea of the.
Right.
And the first reason is that if there was none, then you would have the logical problem of not being able to support unique ignorance.
Right. Thank you for saying that much more clearly than me.
Although
Um,
I must admit, that's what I found kind of brain twisting is that it's sort of like, wouldn't that be a good thing? You know, the,
well, I
the,
think he's taking
the
it as being self-evident. It's evident that we have this problem, so logically it needs to go somewhere.
right,
I mean,
but
maybe it's a little circular, It's like, well, if you got rid of this, if this is how our scheme works, and if you mess with the scheme doesn't work anymore. So it has to be this way.
exactly. That was what I was looking at. I was going, well, wait a minute. Then it just becomes this whole self-referential nonsense. I mean,
Right.
there's that risk. Ha.
Um, okay. So then number two, there would also be the flaw of the mental consciousness being dissimilar to the five sense consciousnesses, since the eyes and so on are the simultaneously arising supports of the collection of the five sense consciousnesses. And okay, so my read of this, and Derek, please chime in, is that the mental consciousness has as its base, so the sixth consciousness has as its base the seventh consciousness, um, in the same way that the eye consciousness has as its base visual form. And in order to get this is again, all the parts of the scheme need to fit together for the scheme to work. In order for us to make sense of mind consciousness, the sixth consciousness, and we need a seventh consciousness for it to point at. Is that your understanding of this, Derek? This argument?
Yes.
Okay, great. Um, okay, and then this one I just had no idea what to make of. There would furthermore be the lack of a hermeneutical etymology for mentation. You have any idea what he's talking about? I tried Googling that and just got nowhere.
I think he means that the terminology just wouldn't make sense. I don't know that that's a substantial issue. It doesn't sound like. Hermeneutical etymology is not quite what keeps you up at night, but
No, not usually. Yeah. All right. So let's we'll save that one for the 10th Bhumi
Just like it
Bodhisattva.
wouldn't make sense for us to call something mentation and something else to call it consciousness. It just wouldn't make sense, or something like that.
Mm. In addition, there would be the flaw of being no distinction between the meditative absorption without discrimination and the meditative absorption of cessation. And Derek can give a more detailed explanation of this, but basically that refers to jhana states in which the different consciousnesses sort of go offline, and the meditative absorption without discrimination. The first six have gone offline, and the meditation absorption of cessation. Um, all the temporary cessation of all primary minds and mental factors except the Ali Vijnana. Uh,
Yeah. So that.
so that's sort of it's sort of, maybe you have to have experienced those two different jhana states for that argument to be compelling. But for him writing this, there's clearly a distinction there that his audience he thinks they'll understand.
So some of the nuance and what you just described as uh, the distinction for his audience is that without discrimination is the culmination of the jhana states, the eighth jhana, or the highest of the formless jhana states. And so it's not does not have the quality of path entry or attainment, i.e., understanding of selflessness. Whereas absorption cessation is said to be only available to those who are path of seeing or above, or in the earlier tradition, it's stream enter or above, which means once returner, non-returner, or arhat. And apparently, those individuals who have achieved some level of liberation from samsara can just sort of like take a vacation and go into cessation absorption. They can say, I want to go do this for 2 weeks, and their bodies basically hibernate. They don't breathe, they don't move, their body remains cool but undisturbed. And so by definition, it has to have this distinction of which of the eight are active and not active.
Cool. And then number five is another one that may seem a little far out. Moreover, if there were no clinging to an I and no self-conceit in those gods who are born without discrimination. So this refers to beings who are born in the uppermost reaches of the formless realm. There would be the flaw of their being without afflictions throughout their entire births in this state without discrimination. Um, same sort of issue that we just observed in the jhana meditations. Um, and then six, kind of coming back to earth. Also, the afflicted mind exists because the occurrence of the clinging to an I is observable in virtuous, non-virtuous, as well as neutral states of mind at all times. If it were otherwise, since the clinging of an I would then be associated solely with non-virtuous states of mind, the afflictions of self-conceit would occur only in these states of minds, but not in virtuous or neutral ones. Thus, by virtue of the afflicted mind occurring simultaneously and occurring by being associated, these mistakes will not accrue.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris.
So
Did
then
you
we
want
have
to say something else about that?
do you?
I was hoping to skip ahead. Do you want to sum it
Yeah,
up or
let's go
something?
for it. Let's go for it.
Okay. Um, apart from the 1.8 on page 154, apart from the Ali consciousness, another entity that is mind is not observable. Therefore, it is established that the Ali consciousness that it is the Ali consciousness that is mind, and from this mind contains all seeds, mentation, and consciousness. It's called mind because it is accumulated through variegated seeds that are latent tendencies of phenomena. Boom. Why is this not taught as Alaya consciousness or appropriate in consciousness in the Shravakayana? It's a very interesting section where he claims that there are references to it in the earlier traditions, scriptures or sutras. He says, it is included among subtle knowledge objects, which the Shravakas do not aim at knowing all, but the Shravakas do not aim at knowing all knowable objects. And so this is a reference to the way that the Mahayana describes it's different from the so-called Hinayana or the Shravakayana, saying that Shravakas are focused on understanding one thing and one thing only, which is the absence of self. And Bodhisattvas, Buddhas to be, are interested in knowing everything, omniscience, which is the standard way that Shravaka Arhats and Buddhas are distinguished, is that Buddhas are omniscient, they know everything, they know the nature of phenomena as being empty, of all phenomena, not just the self, and they know the extent, what's called the extent of phenomena, in the sense of knowing all the varieties of phenomena and how beings interact with them or create them or do whatever with the varieties of phenomena. So Shravakas don't aim at it, therefore they don't talk about it, they don't approach subtle knowledge objects. Therefore, even without teaching them the Alaya consciousness, they accomplish liberation through accomplishing knowledge, i.e., of selflessness. So it's not taught to them. On the other hand, bodhisattvas do aim at all knowing all noble objects. Therefore, the Alaya consciousness is taught to them. Without understanding it, it's not easy. This is a sort of a very funny phrase. It's not easy to attain. That implies that it's possible, which I would think would be strange. But anyway, he then goes through some references to that he claims exist in the early sutras, where this shows up, and some of these don't pan out exactly as presented, but there are these interesting references to something similar to the Alaya Vijnana in the earlier traditions texts.
I wonder if he ran this by a Shravaka to see what he thought.
I want, he wrote a large portion, and one of the most famous portions of his Yogacara Bhumi is the Shravaka Bhumi, where he describes the Shravaka path in exquisite detail. And it's intended to be a summary of the Vibhasha, Mahavibhasha corpus.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a summary of everything Shravaka. And you would wonder, like, so who is his source for that?
Right. Yeah. Is he just working with the text, or is he did he actually go out and say, I better check this with I know a Shravaka guy in the next village. You run that by him and see what he thinks.
Yeah, well, apparently he did study quite a lot before he went on his 12-year retreat focused on Maitreya, right? And as Chris just said, his brother was Mr.
Shravaka.
Abhidharma, Mr. Shravaka.
Well, that's true. Yeah, right.
So
I think the other historical thing to consider is that it seemed that you had Sravakas and Mahayanas living in sharing the same monasteries oftentimes.
Breaking bread together, yeah, so to speak.
That's why I wonder if anybody looked at this and said, whoa, wait a minute here.
Yeah, we'll have to find a Shravaka.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's, he goes through that section.
Well, what I found interesting in that section, just using these other terms, was he references the Bhavanga block quote. Yeah, right there at the bottom of the page, Bhavanga, which Derek, you had circulated something on a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of interesting how he first says, well, they don't teach the Alaya Vijnana because their view is limited, and they will be very hard for them to achieve omniscience. And then goes on, oh, well, actually, no, they are teaching it. See, here it is.
Yeah, they reference it, but they don't they don't focus on it. But they acknowledge it, it's there, that it exists, so to speak. These other terms do nothing but also establish the great road of the Alaya consciousness. And he says these three terms differ in this nuance in the way that he's describing them. And then let's skip a little bit ahead. Let's see.
And I just wanted to make one more point,
Sure.
which is I think similar to Asanga's need to ground at the beginning, ground what he's saying in the sutra sources. I think him showing continuity with the Sravaka sources is very important in terms of establishing his credibility. And yeah, I think a real important thing that oftentimes we miss as Western readers, we're used to these sort of like literary philosophical traditions and, like the Enlightenment or like Wittgenstein or Kant, these big people who come along and say, I'm doing something completely different than what was done before me, and this is totally new and original. And it's tempting to interpret these revolutions in Buddhist thought as being the same of, these new thinkers come along and have this totally new idea. But that's not how they understand it. And they really understand what they're doing as elucidating what was the actual intent of the Buddha. That this isn't a new thing. I'm just clearing up confusion that came before me, and this is what was originally taught by the Buddha.
Yeah, that's cool. Thank you. That's a great point. He dives into the latent tendencies in great detail, which I'm not going to try to drag us through. But right at the end of that, in brief, the nature of the Alaya consciousness, the bottom of 159, is to be the maturational consciousness that contains all seeds and includes all individual existence of the three realms and all forms of existence in them. And then, let's see, after this, we have 127. So these are verse numbers, right? Chapter 1, verse 27. Cynthia.
Yeah, I just had one question that was in that section that was about the causes, where they're kind of talking about all the causes that are the wrong things, like the cause of things from Ishvara and all that sort of thing. But one of them I was a little confused by, and it may be my own ignorance, no doubt. But one of them was about it was a little further back there, but it was about like seeds being the result of prior actions. And I thought that to a certain extent that these tendencies or seeds are thought of as being the result of prior actions. So I just wondered,
do you know where specifically?
oh gosh, I saw it, but then you flew by it. Was it
I think verse 20.
like 159 or something? I don't know.
Yeah, go to one. Yeah,
159.
think they arise from the cause and consist of former actions.
There you go. So that one I was just kind of trying to understand, is that not part of what creates these
Well, it's certainly not primal substance, but you're talking about this. Think that they
yes.
arise from the cause that consists of former actions. I think he goes through these, doesn't he?
He may go back to it in verse again later or something, but yeah, he does go through them, but
part of it was like the nuance of how dependent origination is not like a one-to-one thing, and there's not like a
Yeah,
specific
okay. I mean,
cause and result, but
I
yeah, this
just
thing
somehow that
about
was the only one
reaction.
that all the rest of them is like, okay, yes, of course, it's not that, it's not that, it's not that. But then when it just struck me that when we talk about these tendencies, I thought we do sort of think of seeming
Yeah,
actions, plant
yeah,
seeds.
we would have said, yeah, that's it. That makes sense. They
Well,
arise from the
it
cause.
maybe this is a critique of the Sarvastivada notion of a cause in the past causing an effect in the present, not
It's
mediated
possible. Yeah.
by seeds.
Oh, interesting.
Mhm.
Okay, I guess that, yeah, I mean, there must be some explanation. That sounds, it's more plausible than anything I came up with, which was nothing. I do.
Nothing could be plausible in these kids. You never know. Um, let's see. Our time is flying by. So there's a lot of talk about the different types of latent tendencies, about the different types of afflictions. So let's see. I'm going to skip to stanza 43, which is on page 166. So it goes through a whole bunch of examples that could not make sense without the alaya consciousness. And then it concludes and says, therefore, without the maturational consciousness that contains all seeds, the afflictedness of birth would not be acceptable either. So the maturational consciousness is that one of the three aspects of the alaya vijnana, the ripening of the seeds. How would mundane purified phenomena be also unacceptable? And he goes through some scenarios. Here's where I wanted to chime in. Likewise, supermundane purified phenomena would not be acceptable either without the knowledge. So, supermundane purified phenomena are positive, virtuous, transcendent phenomena, i.e., those that cause liberation. In quotes the Buddha, independence on the sounds of others, giving teachings, and independence on one's own individual proper mental engagement, correct vision arises with these as the cause. So like, how does the scheme of the three types of mind, mentation, and consciousness function in the positive way of producing, bringing about the path and the result of the path? With regard to that statement, one may assume that the proper mental engagement that arises due to hearing the sounds of others' teachings. So he's referring to the three types of prajna here. And the first one is hearing, right? And then contemplating and then meditating. So hearing is like a reference to Shravakas. Those are the hearers, the listeners. So hearing the sounds of others' teachings. Willing, so how does that function? They're just sounds, and they go into your auditory consciousness. And how does that become anything other than more just like seeds and so forth? They will impregnate either the ear consciousness or the mental consciousness, or both, in the form of latent tendencies. In that case, however, by the time one mentally engages in a proper manner in those dharmas, the ear consciousness that heard them does not arise anymore. Those are momentary and past. So by the time the mind thinks about them, they don't exist. The mental consciousness too becomes interrupted by distracted kinds of consciousness of it. And then when a state of mind that is associated with proper mental engagement arises, the mental, so what do proper mental engagement, you can imagine like contemplation, maybe meditation, the mental consciousness supposedly impregnated by the latent tendencies of listening, using the term for the first prajna, together with those latent tendencies, has ceased and passed, thus having gone long since. If it does not exist anymore, from what would the state of mind that is associated with proper mental engagement supposedly has that mental consciousness as its seed arise later? So using another scheme as a proof for support for there being Alaya Vijnana.
And specifically saying that the seeds can't be stored in the sense consciousnesses.
Exactly, right, because those are gone.
Because they're gone.
Momentary history.
But
The
doesn't
mundane
it
state of
also,
mind.
go ahead,
Go
sorry.
on.
Well, doesn't it
I was-
also, though, say that it doesn't exactly mix into the Alaya Vijnana in the same way as the other sources of seeds? That was the part that I think I read here,
I think that's
right?
Yeah,
coming up, isn't
he
it?
gets to that later.
Okay, that was really
Spoiler
interesting.
alert. Jeez. The mundane state of mind is associated with property and mental gate and never arises and ceases simultaneously with the supermundane mind. It is associated with correct vision. Vision being like the terminology for realization, like the path of seeing vision. Therefore, the former, the mundane state of mind, is not impregnated by the latter. The supermundane mind, a little vague. Since it has not been impregnated, it's not acceptable for it to be the seed of the latter. So mundane mind can't be the seed for supermundane mind. Consequently, supermundane purified phenomena would also be unacceptable phenomena. Would also be unacceptable if the maturational consciousness that contains all seeds did not exist. For it is not reasonable for the latent tendencies of listening to retain the seeds of the supermundane in that mundane state of mind. So a little plug for like Buddha nature, like it has to be present or ready in the mind stream in some way for it to then come to fruition. If the maturational consciousness contains all seeds of the cause of afflicted phenomena, how could it be acceptable as the seed for its remedy, the supermundane mind? Since sentient beings are not familiar with the supermundane mind, the latent tendencies of this supermundane mind do not exist in the Alaya. But if these latent tendencies do not exist, then it must be stated from which seeds the supermundane mind arises. It arises from the seeds that are the latent tendencies of listening, which are the natural outflow of the completely pure Dharma Dhatu. Whoa! Where did that come from? Suddenly, like a third actor has entered into the scheme. So are these latent tendencies of listening then of the nature of the Alaya consciousness, or are they not? If they are of the nature of the consciousness, how could they be acceptable as the seeds of its remedy? But if they're not of its nature, what is consequently regarded as the matrix of these seeds that are the latent tendencies of listening? Sorry, what? Of listening. As for the matrix into which these latent tendencies of listening enter in dependence on the awakening Buddhas, they enter into the maturational consciousness in the matter of coexisting with it in a latent manner, just like a mixture of milk and water. They are not the Alaya consciousness because they are the very seeds of its remedy. So these traders exist in the midst of the Alaya consciousness from day one.
It's very interesting. Very interesting. They're existing sort of alongside, simultaneous with the Alaya Vijnana, sort of functionally similar, but because the Alaya Vijnana is characterized by confused mind, they can't be part of it, but they look a lot like it.
So it
Yeah, it's
becomes, is
fascinating.
this A prime? Is this like a, you know,
Yeah.
a consciousness 8A and 8B?
Or like they've got like a work permit, but they're not citizens.
Certain type of visa. This extended effort to like explain how does ignorance and wisdom come about. Where Nagarjuna is over on the side, he's fallen asleep long ago. He couldn't care less because all of this is bullshit, right? But these guys go to great length to try to like explain how does this come about. Here, based on small latent tendencies, they become medium. Latent, based on medium, they become great. And these entail listening, reflection, and meditation being performed many times. The three prajnas, now the small, medium, great tendencies of listening are regarded as the seeds of the Dharmakaya. Since they are the remedy of the Alaya consciousness, they are not of the nature of Alaya consciousness. They are something mundane, but since they are the natural outflow of the supermundane, completely pure Dharmadhatu, they serve as the seeds of the supermundane mind. Even when the supermundane mind has not yet arisen, these latent tendencies are the remedy for being ensnared by the afflictions. The remedy for going to the miserable realms are the remedy that makes all wrongdoing vanish. So they're the same thing. They go either way. They're also conducive to meeting Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. The latent tendency to listening of beginner Bodhisattvas are mundane. Those latent tendencies are regarded as being included in the Dharmakaya. And those of Shravakas, Pratyekabhus, being included in this new term, the Vimuktikaya. Probably we've never encountered that before. So we have Kaya, body, or embodiment, and then we have Vimukti, is complete separation or liberation, freedom, path of liberation, path, like Buddha Ghosha's text is the path of purification, Visuddhi, Magga's path, Vishuddhi is purification, Vimutti, there's another text called the path of liberation, Vimutti. They're not the Alaya consciousness, but are included in the Dharmakaya and the Vimuttikaya. So this idea that like Shravakas don't have a Dharmakaya because they're Shravakas, and never the twain shall meet. And this early period of Mahayana where there was this idea that beings had a destiny, a highest possible destiny, and they couldn't really shift. And the Shravakas, their destiny as Arhats was to achieve the Vimuktikaya. To the extent that they gradually increase from all to being medium to grade, to the same extent the maturational consciousness wanes and undergoes the fundamental change. It has undergone this change in all, if it has undergone this change in all respects, the maturational consciousness that contained all seeds is then without any seeds and also is relinquished in all aspects.
I wish he said a little more about what that fundamental change is.
Well, it's huge in the Lankavatara Sutra and in other places. He talks about it in the other chapters of this text.
Yeah, I just mean here, he just presents it and moves on right away.
He could at least say, we'll talk about that later in the chapter. How can this Alaya consciousness coexist with what is not the Alaya, like milk and water weighing? This is like wild geese drinking by separating milk from... This is this famous legend in Indian lore that geese and swans in particular have this ability to separate milk and water. And they can drink milk water and extract the milk and leave the water. I don't know if this has... I don't think it has any basis in reality. Similar to the following: one becomes free from mundane desire, the latent tendencies, the level of not being in meditative equipoise wane, while the latent tendencies of the level of being in meditative equipoise increase, because all these seeds are there for meditative equipoise. So this is sort of like support for cultivating, overcoming a mundane desire, in that it spontaneously allows the propensity for meditation to kick in, and until there finally occurs the fundamental change, the ultimate, the ultimate goal or a prime objective, right? Okay, so skipping ahead again a little bit. Here's 158 on page 180. Okay, so this sort of sums things up. What is the classification of the Alaya consciousness in brief? It's to be regarded as threefold and as fourfold. Threefold in terms of three particular aspects of latent tendencies. The particular aspect that consists of latent tendencies of expression, of views about a self, and latent tendencies of the links of existence. What is he talking about? The latent tendencies which are expressed become ripe later on. The latent tendencies of fixation on a self, and the latent tendencies of pratitya samutpada, presumably the links of existence. The fourfold classification in terms of propelling, so being the cause of being propelled into certain existences, being classified in terms of the actual maturation of that propelling process, the ripening of the seeds, being classified in terms of cause, and being classified in terms of characteristics. Odd scheme. It's actually, sorry, not the place I wanted to dive in. Okay. Actually, here, let's go from here to the end. If the Ali consciousness, so this is on page 172, if the Ali consciousness did not exist with its characteristic of what is common and uncommon, the distinction between the arising of the world of the container and the world of sentient beings would be unacceptable. And this refers to what we saw in the Dharma Dharmatava Bhanga about like what's common is the view that we all live in a world with up and down and trees and cars and blah, blah, blah. And the unshared or uncommon is that we all have our own stream of karmic momentum. Chris, did you want to chime in?
I was just going to say that in the previous verse, he describes common versus uncommon very clearly. 160.
Thank you. You want to consists of the seeds of the world that is a container. This phrase of like container and what is contained. Container being the external environment. What is contained is us, sentient beings. What is an uncommon consists of the seeds of the ayatanas of individual beings. What is common consists of the seeds of what arises without feelings, the inanimate and the animate. You know, we see this scheme like Rinpoche, Trungpa Rinpoche uses in the Sadhana Mahamudra, the animate and the inanimate. Let's see, the Alaya consciousness back to the bottom of 172 also has the characteristic of the impregnations of negative tendencies and the characteristics of suppleness. Suppleness. We know suppleness is the translation of Shinjan, pliancy, right? Flexibility, changeability. The characteristics of the impregnations of negative tendencies consists of the seeds of the afflictions and secondary afflictions. The characteristic suppleness consists of the seeds of contaminated virtuous phenomena. So you have to start with contaminated virtuous phenomena, right? If the Alaya consciousness did not exist with these characteristics, the distinction of the matrix not functioning adroitly and functioning adroitly, respectively, through maturation would be unacceptable. Chris, what do you make of this? You want to say anything about adroitly and the matrix, the use of the term matrix?
I think the matrix is going to be the Alaya Vijnana. Yeah?
The distinction of the matrix, the Alaya Vijnana, not functioning adroitly and functioning adroitly through maturation.
I think that if we were unable to be impregnated by negative tendencies, which are characterized by the consist of the afflictions and sanctuary afflictions, and if it were unable to be impregnated by supple seeds of contaminated virtuous phenomenon, the system wouldn't work very well as described. The system wouldn't be a good explanation for what we observe in our life and on the path.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, cool. Thanks. So if the Alaya consciousness has the characteristics having been experienced already and not having been experienced yet, the characteristic of not having been experienced already refers to the maturations of virtuous and non-virtuous seeds having already matured. And of not having been experienced refers to seeds that are just latent tendencies for the arising of discursiveness, prapancha, conceptuality since beginning of this time. If the Alaya consciousness did not exist with these characteristics, it would be unacceptable for progressively committed virtuous and evil actions to have already been experienced by way of having yielded their results, nor would it be acceptable for the latent tendency of expression to newly arise. Chris, what do you make of this phrase? It would be unacceptable for the previously committed virtuous evil actions to have already been experienced. So it's just like what we experienced from in our past. Things that already happened that bring about results, and things that haven't. In addition, there's the characteristic of analogy, because the alaya consciousness is like an illusion, a mirage, a dream in appearance, due to blurred vision. If the alaya consciousness did not exist with this characteristic, it would be unacceptable for it to be the cause of mistakenness of virtue, of its consisting of the seeds of false imagination. It also has the characteristics of completeness and incompleteness, referring to the alaya consciousness of those who possess bondage in its completeness. What does that mean?
Maybe like beings in a hell realm, or beings without any kind of any of those good
Potential.
qualities mixed in.
Yeah. Within the characteristic of incompleteness, the characteristic having been weakened refers to alaya consciousness of those who are free from mundane desire. So the characteristic of having been weakened, so those negative tendencies have been weakened. And the characteristic of being partially eliminated refers to the alaya of those who are on the path. The characteristic of all of them having all the afflictive obscuration have been eradicated, and the characteristic of all afflictive and cognitive obscurations having been eradicated refer to the alaya of Vaishnanas, of Arhats, Pratyeka Buddhas, and Buddhas, as is approved. So we have three individuals, Arhats, Pratyeka Buddhas, and Tathagatas, and we have the characteristic of all afflictive obscurations and the characteristic of all afflictive and cognitive. So we have only two stages and then three types of beings, and so Pratyeka Buddhas are being lumped in with Tathagatas as having eradicated all afflictive, klesha, and jnana obscurations, whereas Arhats only overcome the afflictive obscurations in the Mahayana scheme. If the alaya consciousness did not exist with these characteristics, it would have been acceptable for afflicted phenomena to cease in a progressive manner. And why are the maturations of virtuous and non-virtuous phenomena called obscured and neutral? For what is obscured and neutral is not in contradiction with what is virtuous and non-virtuous, etc. What else? What did I skip over that is of interest? Or any comments or questions, issues that people came across in this chapter? Any reactions to it?
Well, only if no one else has a question. I am curious that I was the two obscurations that you were just talking about, which we have talked about a lot. I was reading something from one of Zigar Control's writings. I just happened to run across it earlier today. It was talking about the three categories of obscurations, with the third one being habitual. And I was just wondering, like, how do those sort of two categories that we often talk about and this third one, how does that all fit? Like, is there a place where they added that extra one, or, do you know how that works?
I'm not familiar with the term habitual. It was habitual obscuration.
Yeah, I'll read. It's a short paragraph. If you want, I could read it. This
Sure,
came
I've
from
seen a scheme where there's the third one is obscurations to meditation, but I've never heard this. Yeah, read
this
it.
one. He says this is from his 2023 Shredra, and I guess they put together a couple of different sources there. There are three obscurations that prevent us from seeing the nature as it is: emotional, cognitive, and habitual obscurations. The emotional, we know what those are. The cognitive come from grasping to phenomena as real. And he says, from early on in my studies, I had a pretty good grasp of these two and how they prevent us from seeing the nature. It made sense to me how they become the mechanism having a deluded view of the world and self, how samsara is created and how we suffer in samsara. But I struggled for a long time to understand habitual obscurations, bhakcha ki dripa, which Lord Maitreya and Arya Asanga emphasize. Since becoming a teacher, I have come to appreciate this third category of obscurations. I have a handful of students who are resistant to change, and I can see how I am also resistant to change, despite having knowledge of emptiness and no self. The habitual obscurations are what we suffer from most. Of course, we also suffer from the first two, but once we come onto the path, we gain a certain amount of hearing, contemplative, and meditative wisdom. Yet what we're up against most is a sheer resistance to believing something other than what we habitually believe or are accustomed to. And that little clip is all I have. There's probably more in the whole articles and all that.
My understanding of what he's talking about is there's, in some places, when you ask what's the source of suffering, it's karma and klesha. And klesha gives rise to karma, to habitual patterns. Klesha is the root of ignorance, or the root of samsara is ignorance. They afflict the cognitive obscuration, and that gives rise to the kleshas, and the kleshas give rise to karmic or habitual patterns. And we've seen this described differently in terms of the path of familiarization or meditation, where you have the impure stages up to the 8th bhumi, and then the pure stages, where the afflictive obscurations are seen through at the fixation that gives rise to the afflictive obscurations is cut through at the path of seeing the first bhumi. And then those afflictive obscurations are progressively undone. And there's different schemes for them, like you have the great of the great, the medium of the great, the 81 obscurations progressively. And at some point, you're no longer creating further afflictive obscuration at the 8th bhumi. But you still have this, the bakchak, the seeds, the impregnations, and this analogy of like when perfume is in a perfume bottle, and there's no more perfume, you can't get any perfume out, but the bottle still smells strongly of perfume. There's the sense that we overcome all the afflictive obscurations, but we still have this just habit pattern of dualistic experience of this and that. So I think what he's doing is he's sort of extending that analogy to a certain characteristic of stubbornness that he observes in himself and primarily his students. When he talks about himself, it's primarily, I think, referring to his students being humble and using that there's like overt klesha, and then there's this habitual pattern. Rinpoche just said habitual pattern, just like constantly repeating mundane little fixation, little beliefs and activities or patterns. Anyone else on that?
Just the one thing I was curious about, the fact that he specifically references that Maitreya and Asanga emphasize this. So I was sort of curious, because we are reading the Asanga section here, but you haven't seen it coming up in that.
They do it in their text, the Abhisamaya Alamkara, the Ornament of Clear Realization, where they map out in great detail the stages of the path. And this whole scheme that we have of like the Trungpa Rinpoche simplifies into the twofold egolessness. We're all familiar with that phrase, twofold egolessness, which really means there's two parts to the egolessness of phenomena, right? There's egolessness of self and the egolessness of phenomena. And egolessness of phenomena has two parts. It has the belief in the reality of phenomena. And then it has, Rinpoche describes it as the arrogance of thinking that you understand that, right? Which is his way of describing it. But it's this big debate in the Mahayana tradition of like how do bodhisattvas compare to arhats? How are they better than arhats? And the certain part of the Mahayana or Tibetan tradition says that there's this twofold aspect to the selflessness of phenomena, and that bodhisattvas uproot both part of that, whereas arhats only uproot the first part. And they remain having habitual propensities and that's their outflows. That's what they call it. Out, like nirvana with outflows. They sort of acknowledge I still have these habitual patterns that are related to my skandhas that I haven't overcome. But when I die and my body disappears, then I'll be fully liberated. And so Sangha and Maitreya lay out that scheme as a way of differentiating the accomplishment of the different movements on the path. Anyone else comments on that or anything else? Any other points in this chapter that I glossed over, Chris? Not really. A lot of detail on the varieties of impregnations and latent tendencies and so on. And a lot of defensiveness, like constantly trying to defend this view, clearly feeling under attack, having to defend this whole thing from Morgan, basically from Morgan. The son is constantly feeling that he has to defend this from Nagarjuna. So anyway.
I think one thing that I've been thinking a lot about with regards to this particular class and as it relates to Madhyamaka is this enormous emphasis on meditation that exists within Yogacara. And I sort of see this tradition so much coming out of just a need to explain meditative experience. Nagarjuna came along and sort of blew the world apart. And yet all of this fantastic variety of meditation experience still arises. Progress along the path, and sort of a yearning for some sort of explanation for all that, and for how one moves through the path and sort of the lived experience of it, as opposed to a strictly logical exercise, something that can help explain what it's like to be a human going through these things. I think for those of us, white Western Buddhists who, went to college and, are very good at thinking analytically, there's a real appeal to the Madhyamaka because, it's sort of similar to what we know of thinking logically and taking apart arguments and being very rigorous in that way. But that at a certain point you have to get out of your head and sit on the cushion and experience your life and touch your mind intimately. And I think that's where this tradition is coming out of, and really what it has to offer. And sort of assessing it on those terms, on more experiential terms rather than sort of like strictly logical terms, is maybe a fruitful way in. As opposed to, sort of off the bat immediately, well, this, Nagarjuna would scoff at this, so what's the point?
To take the opposite point of view, or sort of maybe a complementary point of view, to be for interest of like, okay, yeah, we gotta like focus on meditation. Like, how do I've studied, let's say, Nagarjuna, and it makes so much sense, but So like my brother, let's say Vasubandhu, he's like a Abhidharma person, and he's gonna like continue to like try to understand his experience in terms of Abhidharma. But I can take the essence of Nagarjuna sort of liberating reasoning, use of reasoning to progress in meditation without like giving into the urge to explain it all and come up with all these structures. Which sort of seems to go on forever. Just like to present different points of view.
Yeah, totally.
Maybe different like personality types or
I was just going
something.
to say, is it the different learning styles thing that, some people relate logically and some people, I mean, for some people explanations help, and for other people the explanations don't help so
Yeah,
much.
yeah,
Different forms of experience that help with learning.
yeah. Because there's not necessarily connection between like intellectually understanding the beauty of the logic of Nagarjuna's arguments, and then whether you put that into practice or not is sort of can go either way. It can remain a dry understanding, or it can be moistened by practice. And then whether you like have to understand the whole fabric of it or not is also has an option to it. But it certainly was a very popular option, and one that was blended together in what we receive today in the Tibetan tradition. These come together with that, if you're not aware of this background and the tension between these traditions, it seems like okay, it's one sort of seamless tradition. We learn about emptiness, and we learn about the eight consciousnesses, and okay, yeah, we meditate. Anyway, so next week we dive into Vasubandhu. I think a full dose of Vasubandhu with a survey of 3 of his short texts. So we'll do that then. So let's dedicate the merit and close. I think we all know the dedication chant. Do you want to lead us, Chris?
By this merit, may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, everyone else.
Thank you.
Neil, you made it just in time.
Yeah.
You were just getting started.
Yeah.
Is that your
It
new
was fun.
organization, Kids Rise?
Oh, sorry. That's the old one. Yeah. I'm still there. Still there. I
Well,
should
nice
get
to
my
see
bag.
you.
Likewise. All right.
Have a good evening, everyone. Take care.
Good
See you
night.
soon.
Good night. Thank you.